if anyone was here yesterday, you're going to know this is actually not a new story. It's a continuation, not just of yesterday's main character, Haru Hariva, but of Haru and Elwyn, who were our main characters last year. And we're even going to hear a little bit about the other main character from last year, Donnie, today. Just as a reminder or a little teaser for those of you who haven't heard of it before. Now, the stories this week take place in a place called Papua New Guinea. And Papua New Guinea does not speak the same language that we do. You're going to hear a lot of people talking in their language, but I'm translating it to English for you. But every once in a while, I will be using some of their words, and those are great words for you to start learning and memorizing, and I will tell you why, because I happen to know that the people who come here and spin that wheel, they love to ask questions about what do those different words mean. So you might want to listen for that especially. Also, one of the two books that I'm telling these stories from is this book here called Canoes, Crocodiles, and Christ. And I just checked yesterday. They have it in the ABC, in the bookstore down there. So if you want to be able to start reading the book on your own, you can go get it. Last year, I told a lot of stories from here that I'm not going to retell this year. I'm continuing on. So if you want to catch up, you can read the book yourself or have your parents read it for you. And you can also find the last year's videos on YouTube because all the stories and the skits from last year are there too. But the story today continues on about the adventures of Haru Hariva. Now, Haru had two friends with him. By the way, could I get one of my teen helpers to just come up and sit up towards the front here? That'd be really great. Haru had two friends who did a lot of traveling with him. They had also become converted to the 7 days. Anybody remember what the 7 days were? What were the 7 days? They're a group, the Seventh-day Adventists, who were being missionaries in that region. And so the word for the Seventh-day Adventists in the village languages was 7 days. The 7 days now had Haru, along with his two friends, Omoa and Koivi, who are the primary missionaries from the natives to other natives. And they were helping Elwyn Martin, who was the Australian missionary who was in charge of that region. Elwyn had taken them along on a trip up the up the Tarama River. And we learned about that last year. They went up, they were going to go and give God's word to the cannibal villages. This was an area that was very frightening. A lot of the other villages in that area of Papua New Guinea would not go anywhere near the villages on the Tarama River because they knew that those villages practiced cannibalism. What is cannibalism? What do you eat if you're a cannibal? Other people. That's right. You eat other people. So those other people did not want to be by the cannibals. But Haru really believed something that Elwyn Martin had shown him in the Bible, and that was to go to every person, go to all nations, take the gospel to the whole world. And Haru said, well, I can't go around the whole world, but I can go to a lot of people right here in my country that nobody has ever gone to visit or tried to be nice to. So they went up the Tarama River, and they had gone up that river, finding a lot of villages that weren't interested until they finally found one little village called Kumiao. Kumiao was hidden. It was down one little side river that you couldn't find unless you knew which branches to pull aside from the main river and find the little hidden river. And they had gone up there in a canoe, and they had found a village which was different. It was different because of one man named Donnie. Now, I'm not going to tell you all the details of what happened to Donnie. That's in the book, and it was in the stories from last year. But briefly, Donnie was a man who was a leader in this village, hidden along the tributary river. And in Kumiao village, Donnie one day had a dream that had told him, a white shining man had said, go leave the village. And then the white shining man had trained Donnie through a bunch of dreams. He had trained him in dreams about the Sabbath. He had taught him about tithing. He had taught about eating healthy things and not eating pigs and other people. And then Donnie had come back to the village of Kumiao and said, people, I need to tell you these things that the shining man told me in my dreams. He even had a special sign. The shining man had given him a special, miraculous sign to show the people. And I'm not going to tell you what it was because that's not the point of today's story. But if you want to know what it was, you can read the book or you can ask people who were here last year. The point is, by the time Haru, Omoa, and Koivi got there, the people were very interested because they had been told by Donnie, people are going to come to tell you even more of what the shining man told me. This was great. God had prepared the way for this little village in the middle of just absolute complete jungle and rivers with no roads, nothing of any kind of technology, no Wi-Fi, no electricity. God had already got his message in there so that when Haru, Omoa, and Koivi showed up, the people were interested. They wanted to know more. They said, we already know the basics. Tell us more. So Haru had made sure to go back and get Elwyn Martin. He was so excited about what had happened there that Haru said, I got to tell Pastor Martin. He made the trip back down the Tarama River. It took a couple of weeks to get back to where Elwyn Martin was. Come on, Pastor Martin, you got to come back up. You got to meet Donnie and the people of Kumiao village. And Pastor Martin came back up there. He heard the story of all these dreams from Donnie's very own lips. And he saw the miraculous sign that Donnie had from the shining man in the dream. And Pastor Martin said, this is amazing. This needs to be our home base. These people already like us. They're not going to eat us. They've already stopped eating humans. They've stopped eating pigs. Look how much they've changed. They already now are starting to even stop smoking. Now, there were things that were harder for these people to give up. They actually stopped eating pigs and other people fairly easily. What was difficult was a couple other things. They love to chew betel nut. Betel nut it's a plant material that when you chew it, it makes a red saliva come in your mouth and it leaves stains. And the worst part of it is that it's addictive, so you kind of get stuck on it where you want to have it all the time and you can't survive without it. But also it causes cancers. It makes you get really bad sores in your mouth and you get cancers growing in those sores. The people had a hard time giving that up because of how addictive that was. People had a hard time changing their habits to start bathing. There was no bathing. Once you were born, that was it. You were just going to go through life. Whatever dirt got on you, got on you. In fact, newborn babies wouldn't even get cleaned off after they were born. And they come out, I'll tell you what, guys, newborn babies do not come out very pretty, okay? They would just be spending months just wearing all the blood and mess on them until it finally kind of came off in the rain, maybe. Nobody ever went in a river to bathe. If you happen to fall in, fine, but you never went to try to bathe. So that was a hard thing for people to start to do. It was hard for them to start wearing more clothing. They were used to just wearing a tiny little leaf over the middle of their legs here, just a tiny little leaf, and that was it. Nothing in back, just a tiny little leaf. And one of the hardest things for them to give up was believing in puri puri. Now that's a term I used last year. Anybody remember what puri puri was? Just kind of a general idea. What was puri puri? That's right. It was a spell, a satanic spell that the witch doctors would use and that the people really strongly believed in. If anything bad happened to you, you blamed it on puri puri. If you broke your leg, if you stubbed your toe, you got a cold, or definitely if a family member died, you blamed it on puri puri. Puri puri meant that somebody must have gone to a witch doctor, given them something special, so the witch doctor made a spell and cast it on that person, so then they got hurt or killed, and now you had to go and get revenge. It was a brilliant way for Satan to keep people hurting each other, because then anything bad that ever happened, they would go out looking for the person to get revenge on. Did you put puri puri on me? Was it you? Was it you? I'm going to kill you. It was a really hard thing for the people to give up believing in that, because it was an easy way to explain when bad things happened. But the 7 days now started talking to them more and explaining to them more. And Pastor Martin said, I'll come back 6 weeks from now and see how things are going, Haru. And Pastor Martin came back 6 weeks later, and the village of Kumiao was so different now. Now there was nobody eating pigs, nobody smoking. People were barely using betel nut. A few people still were. People were starting to bathe. People were starting to wear a little bit more clothing, looking a little bit more like they were going to be able to look like civilized people, like people who actually wanted to look good and then help others around them instead of just being self-centered. It was amazing what a change had happened. And so now Pastor Martin said, Haru, I really think we should make this a permanent base. I need somebody to run this base. Would you be willing to stay here? And Haru said, well, I need to ask my wife Kara, because we already have, how many children did they have? You remember yesterday? They had 4. Well, now we already have 6. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Haru and Kara, they had children on a regular basis. So now they had 6 kids by this point. And Haru said, I got to ask my wife Kara, because, we'll be living in a village of former cannibals surrounded by all these other villages of cannibals. Let me talk to Kara. He went over to Kara and he said, what do you think, Kara? Pastor Martin wants us to stay here. Pastor Martin says that we should live here and make this our base, even though we're surrounded by cannibals and we have young children. What do you think? And you know what Kara said? She said, I think we should stand on the promises. Let's just stand on the promises of God. We're going to stay here. We'll trust God to take care of us. So they did. And after a few more weeks of getting things settled in the Kumiao base, building a house for his family, Haru said, all right, Kara, you take care of the kids. It's time for me, Amo, and Koivi to keep on going to more villages, because we're going to try to reach every village on this river. Now, they had been promised a canoe. This was also in the stories from last year. A big canoe was going to be built for them, and it had not been finished building yet. So Haru, Amo, and Koivi took a smaller canoe that just held 3 people, and they said, all right, we're going to go to some of the small villages that are hidden along these little winding tributary rivers that branch off of the Turama River. So they started going, and as they were going, they could hear drums beating. Now, they weren't drums like you might see like at a concert. They were hollow logs, but you could beat them with sticks, and they would make booming sounds that would ring for a long distance. And they would beat them in special rhythms that could actually communicate information. And so as Haru, Amo, and Koivi were going along, they could hear the booming drums, and then the booming sound would come from one place, and then a little while later it would come from here, and then later from way over there, as people would hear it, and then they would drum it on their own drum to pass the information along. So information traveled along this hollow log drum highway way faster than they could travel. So by the time they got to the village of Sesabaruma, the people there knew about them. Haru, Omoa, and Koivi had asked before they'd gone up this river, they had asked one of the local men at one of the other villages, how do you say, what is the greeting here in this village? Now you might ask, what's the greeting? I mean, you know, if you see somebody, you just say hello, right? But let me see. How many people in this room speak English? Raise your hand. All right, put your hand down. If you came up to somebody else who speaks English and you say hello, they're probably going to know you're saying hello, right? Here's the problem. In Papua New Guinea, there are at least 800 different languages and dialects. Even people who grow up in a village here might speak a totally different dialect from people who live in a village 1 mile away. So they might never be able to even communicate with each other. So it could be very difficult to actually communicate to other people if you were going around as a traveling missionary. But Haru had been blessed with a special gift. He could learn languages and dialects really quickly. So he had asked one of the local men, what are the local greetings? Can you tell me local greetings for the villages I might encounter up this river? And they had told him, okay, at this village, I think you would say this, and at this village, I think it would be this. And one of the phrases they had taught him was, one of the most common ones is, Daro Mbe. When you come to the village, you say, Daro Mbe. And if they speak that language, their reply to you, just as if you said, hello, how are you doing? Their reply is going to be, Daro Ao, which means, I'm well. So he had all these different greetings tucked into his head. They got to the village of Sesabaruma, and the village was empty except for the long house. They lived in these long, one building that held everybody that lived in the village, raised up on stilts. There was smoke coming out of the top, and they could tell that all the women and children had run away to hide. And they could tell that the men of the village were probably inside the longhouse, because the longhouse, all of its doors were closed, and there was smoke coming out of the roof through the openings for releasing the cooking fires. And Haru looked at Amo and Koivi, said, all right, well, let's pray. So they gathered around, they prayed, and they thought to themselves, all right, what are we going to do? We're going to go there. We're going to tell them about Jesus. We are standing on the promises. We know that Jesus is going to take care of us. We are going to go and talk to them, and we're not going to be frightened of this. And Haru even thought to himself, you know, we've been promised my special verse. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall flames scorch you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Haru was going to stand on that particular promise, and he went and he climbed up the ladder into the Dubu. Oh, that's the name of the long house, by the way. That long house on stilts is called the Dubu. He opened the door to the Dubu, and inside was sitting a group of village men, all staring at them sullenly. And there, close by, was a rather large cooking pot. And inside that cooking pot was boiling water, because it was set on top of a fire, and it was bubbling and boiling. And Haru thought to himself, when you pass through the waters, they shall not overflow you. There's water in there. When you pass through the fire, it will not scorch you. Well, that's heated up water with fire underneath it. This promise really better be good, God, because there's both water and fire waiting for us. That's a pot they would cook people in. The men all sat there looking at them sullenly, and Haru thought to himself, I need to say something. And he had that greeting that he had been taught out of the many different greetings he had learned. He thought, we'll try this one. And he came into the room, he stepped in bravely, he said to the men, Daro Mbe. And the look on their faces was equal parts surprise and disgust. Surprise that he knew the language, and disgust, because then they started muttering to each other, now we have to say nice things to him. We have to say Daro Ao, because he is one of us. He speaks our language. Now we have to treat him like a friend. Oh man, I was hungry. I was going to eat him. So they all turned to him, Daro Ao. And they had a special greeting that you would do. When you would greet somebody who was a friend, or who you were going to treat as a friend, you'd go up, you would shake hands with them, and then you would also pull. Have you guys ever done this? You would pull your fingers back fast, that you made a snapping sound with your fingers. You guys ever done that? You ever learn how to do that? That's what they would do. The villagers would do this to friends. So they had to do it to every new person who came to the village. They would do this special shake and snap fingers. So the men all went around sullenly. Dado-ow, dado-ow, dado-ow. And then they said to each other, now we cannot eat them because they are wantok. Wantok means, is pigeon, the pigeon English for they want to talk. They're wantok. We can understand them. They want to talk to us. Now we have to at least listen to what they have to say. But, said the village headman, we'll listen to them first, and then we'll decide if we're still going to not eat them or not. Haru proceeded to preach for hours, telling them a story about Jesus. Then when his voice got too tired, Amoa preached for hours. Then when his voice got too tired, Koivi preached for hours. They preached all night. The women and the kids who had been hiding out in the jungle all came back and climbed up to the dubu to listen to them. And by the following morning, they were true friends of these villagers. These villagers knew they had come to bring them something special. The villagers did not eat them, and within just a few weeks, the majority of the village ended up becoming 7 days. Ended up making the same changes that had happened in Kumiao village where Dani had been. The gospel was spreading. When they got back to Kumiao, Kaura and the children were still well, and the large canoe was finished now. So they paid the man who had been building the canoe. They gave him a metal axe and a metal knife, which immediately made him one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the village. If you had a metal tool, you were automatically like so wise and powerful. They then took the larger canoe and said, okay, now we need to start making our way back downriver. We want to be able to get some of the villages downriver, and we need to go and make a report to Pastor Martin. So they got their larger canoe, and they realized now because their canoe was bigger, they wouldn't be able to go into the small little tributary rivers, and they couldn't really be able to go very fast. It would take a lot more work to paddle it. It was designed for being paddled by 5 or 6 people. So Haru, Amoa, and Koivi got in it, started going down the river, and they said, we have to keep out watch for 2 things. We always keep watch for crocodiles, of course. But now that we cannot go off into the small river branches, we have to watch out for the tidal boars. Now, when you hear boars, you might be thinking pigs, like, no, not boars like that. A tidal boar is a wave. It's like a tidal wave, but in a river. And now that their big canoe was stuck in the main river, it couldn't go off to the small tributaries, they would never be able to get out of the main river to get out of the way if a tidal bore came by. And there was no real way of predicting exactly when that would take place. Tidal bores were basically a wall of water 10 feet high that when the ocean tides pushed at the end of the river many miles away, even 75 miles away, that force would force a wave of water 10 feet high up the river until it reached as far as it could go with that pressure, and then it would return, sucking backwards down the river about a 10-foot high wave again, and it sounded like a train coming at you, and it would carry logs and all sorts of debris with it. You did not want to be in the river if a tidal bore was coming. Well, they started paddling down the river, thinking to themselves, how are we going to be able to, which village are we going to stop at next? We're going to go head towards the Dopima village. We're going to visit the people there. And they were excitedly talking. They were remembering the first missionaries who 40 years before had gone to Dopima village. It was kind of a sad story, but kind of a funny story because it had been 2 missionaries named Chalmers and Tompkins. These weren't Seventh-day Adventists. They were from a different Christian group, but they had been the first missionaries to reach Dopima village, where they had been promptly killed, boiled in a big pot, and eaten. But the thing that made the story a little bit funny was the fact that the villagers, the cannibals who had killed them and thrown them in the pot and boiled them and eaten them, they didn't know that the boots the men were wearing were not part of their body. They thought the leather boots were their feet. And so the leather boots did not boil and turn soft the way that the rest of the humans did. And so they ate the people, but the boots still weren't ready to eat. And they boiled them, and they kept boiling them, and they boiled them, and they boiled them for 5, 6, 7 days. And finally they said, we'll never get these feet soft. We just must eat them. And so they sat there and chewed on leather boots for days. And for years afterwards, that village was called the village of the Long Chew. I am not making that up. They were talking about the story of the Long Chew when they heard a sound, like a train coming. You guys knew it was going to come, didn't you? Why would I mention a tidal bore if a tidal bore wasn't about to show up? Sure enough, here it was going to be coming, and they started looking around. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? Do we paddle to the side of the river? Now, don't picture a small river. These are not little rivers, little creeks, or even maybe a river that would look like, from here to there, to that wall as being wide. These rivers would be as wide across as 5 football fields. Okay? Wide rivers. And they were in the middle. They're like, we can't paddle this very fast. What do we do? Haru said, okay, I remember before, I was in a canoe accident with my family, and the worst thing was is that we got turned sideways when we crashed into something. So let's not turn sideways and start going across the river like this or like this. Let's turn this canoe around, and we'll paddle right into the tidal bore as it comes, and hopefully we can maintain our balance. It's a big log. Maybe we'll survive. They turned the canoe laboriously around, and as they did, Haru looked down between his legs where there was the most important thing sitting on the bottom of the canoe. It was a box. A box that was woven out of reeds. And in this box it had some important things, like clothes, like food, like tools, but it had the most important thing, and that was Haru's Bible. The only Bible he had. In fact, the only Bible that all of that group of 7 days missionaries to that region of the Turama River had. It was the only Bible on the whole river. And he looked down at that woven reed box, not waterproof, not lashed down, tied to anything. He thought, we should have at least tied it to the canoe or something. What are we going to do? No time to do anything. Turn the canoe around. Here comes the tidal bore, oncoming train, 10 feet high. Smash! And it just lifted up that log like a matchstick and flipped it end over end. And the three men went cartwheeling out into the water. And the canoe flipped at least 2 or 3 times, landing upside down, boosh, on the water. And the men struggled around. They could all swim, thankfully. And they all swam over to the canoe. And they said, all right, let's at least drag it to shore, and hopefully we can turn the canoe over. And so they began swimming, dragging a whole log with them. It took a long time. They swam to the shore, and the whole time they're having to watch for crocodiles, of course. But at that point, I think the crocodiles had probably either all made for shallower waters, or they had been also flung down the river by the tidal bore. So there were no crocodiles around to get them at that moment. They got to shore. They were exhausted. They were wet. And they pushed and pushed and pushed, and they rolled the canoe over, and there inside, Haru saw the box. The men had been flung out. The box was not tied down, and yet it was still inside. How could that be? But then Haru pulled the box out, and he thought, my Bible's in here. Maybe if I'm really careful, if I can carefully lay this Bible open, and I can cut the pages out using my jungle knife, and I can lay them out somewhere in the sunshine. Maybe I can somehow save this Bible, because it's the only printed Bible that I have, the only one that anyone along this river has. And he opened the box, and he looked inside, and we'll find out tomorrow what happened.